Welcome to the podcast Social Work Successes, which aims to shine a big spotlight on the brilliant work that social work professionals do with children and families every day, because this is just not celebrated enough. Practitioners will be sharing their stories, which will hopefully not only inspire others, but also provide some helpful learning in relation to factors that may have contributed to that success. You guys deserve far more recognition than this podcast can give, but thank you for listening and everything you do for the families you work with. Today, I am really fortunate to be joined by Claire for our podcast, Social Work Successes. Claire is actually joining us from a different position. We haven't yet had an episode with someone in management, so this is going to be really interesting for people to listen to your input and also probably learn a little bit more about that role and the various things that you're kind of involved in, the decision-making processes that might go alongside the story that you're going to share. So I think, I might as well just hand over to you. So if you could just briefly kind of introduce yourself and a little bit about the role that you're doing and the overview of the story you're going to share.
Okay, so my name's Clair Graham. I'm the head of service at Birmingham Children's Trust. I'm the head of service for contextual safeguarding, which we know is a model. And I guess contextual safeguarding, when we think about what that entails, means that the service that I oversee looks at all types of exploitation to children. So whether that's sexual, criminal, financial, whether it's debt bondage. But in addition to that, we also look at children who are associated, affiliated with gangs, and who may commit serious youth violence or peer-on-peer violence or be victims of peer violence. In addition, I would add that I also oversee radicalisation, so the prevent agenda. I'm also a foster carer. I have lived experience. I am care experienced, as well as as when I was a child that was often missing and involved and associated with gangs. And so that's kind of the role that I'm in at the moment. Thoroughly enjoy it, really humbled to be in a role where I am or expect my team to be the trusted adults that I probably needed as a child. So it's got that professional aspect to it, as well as it's got that personal passion for that role as well. So that's me.
Great. And actually just picking up on the concept of contextual safeguarding, because that's like I guess a relatively new concept for us within the last kind of decade. I actually came across Carleen Furman because she was on a podcast that I listened to, Social Work Matters. And I heard her talking with Eugene and Fran and Nadia about the work that she did, and she was talking about her PhD. I mean, she's had a huge impact, hasn't she, on that whole model?
She has. And I think, Carleen, we link pretty closely with Carleen. I actually spent a weekend with her, not specifically a weekend with exactly her, but a weekend in London where we looked at, race and culture and ethnicity and how that impacts on some of the decision makings that we make in context to contextual safeguarding. So the framework and the principles that she's put in place and what that applies means that as social work practitioners, we actually have to think very differently about how we approach situations where the risk of harm is outside of the family home. We're actually really, really good at assessing risk when it's familial, when it's parents, it's carers, when it's abuse in the home. But we actually need to, as social work practitioners, change our mindset about how we approach harm outside, within the community, locations, people, places. And I guess the contextual safeguarding framework and model gives us those tools to be able to think differently and approach things differently within that context. So Carleen, amazing work. I'm glad to be, work with her and know her.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the ideas really just struck me, that sense of realizing how much other people in the community can play a part in that safeguarding role, which perhaps before we would have never really thought about that guy who owns the off license, who actually is seeing children, who's hearing conversations, who's observing kids outside and all of that. Like, I think, yeah, it's such a brilliant idea. And I'm really pleased that a concept that started, I guess, with her research has grown and is now really kind of implemented in practice. I think that's brilliant.
I think I would just add that the additional work that we do within the hub is that we don't just sit in an office and talk about a road or a park or a place or a person that's of concern. We will actually send staff out into the community to do those locality-based assessments, work with business owners, parents and carers, the children that are living within the community to better understand, feel, see, hear, smell the community, know where the resilience is, know where if you build those relationships with those people that you could actually reduce risk and harm to children in the community. So we do a lot of work with parent and carers, and we have our own parent carers group, as well as we have 20 children that have been accredited to be youth inspectors to also go out and inspect parks, inspect local authorities, youth centres and things, and come back and give clear recommendations about what they think can assist to make the community a better place. So that's the additional work that we do on top of the day-to-day work of looking and triaging children exploited, children going missing from home and care, and the reasons that they go missing, and helping to reduce those missing episodes, as well as identify any safeguarding concerns.
Brilliant.
It's
Okay,
a lot.
thanks, Claire.
It's a lot. In a
Yes, I
nutshell, it's
mean,
a lot.
that is a number of different sections, isn't it, of needing kind of input and support. So, okay, so if we think about the overview of the family that you're going to talk about today, that you had your involvement in. So if you could just kind of, yeah, just briefly say a little bit about that
So
scenario.
I guess it's a 10-year-old boy who came to this country from an African country with his mom to live in a place within the community, quite a deprived area, a block of flats. So you imagine coming from somewhere from Africa where you're able to run quite freely outdoors and then come and be stuck in a concrete building, essentially. No recourse to public funds, but very vulnerable within the community, and mixing with older boys who are giving him weapons to carry. He's going missing constantly overnight for days. He's been found with drugs. And this is a 10-year-old that for around 2 years, has been criminally exploited by older peers within the community. And I guess the overview for us is, well, how did we successfully safeguard this child, and what measures did we have to go to in order to do that? And I guess the indicators for us was the missing episodes, the odd missing here, there, and everywhere, and then kind of chronologizing those missing episodes and seeing that there's patterns, and actually that the missing episodes were getting longer and longer and more frequent. The exclusion from school, permanent exclusion, this child not coming home for days, and mom, because he's not in care, and because we know that a return home conversation is a statutory obligation to offer, but it's based on consent. And every time I kept reading this child, and mom was refusing to let us come in and talk to this child about why he was going missing. I think there was one day when, again, he'd gone missing, and he'd been missing for 72 hours. And I was in a training session, and I remember just picking up on an email from one of the workers saying, mum's refused again, and the police saying, yeah, mum's, she doesn't understand the risks, and we're concerned about her ability to safeguard. And this is the other thing that I think about as professionals, the blame and the shaming of parents, and actually that they might not understand. So we think about it, this is a family that's come from Africa and knows not that much about English culture, the law, the legislation, or even who to go to. So some of the reasons I think the barriers and challenges for mum was she didn't trust professionals. She's got no recourse to public funds. She's vulnerable. She doesn't understand the legislation within the country. She doesn't understand the risk within a local community, as well as the wider risks within the community. And I remember picking up the phone and just thinking, I need to call this mum myself. So I picked up the phone and called her. And what struck me immediately is that her first language wasn't English. So actually, did she even understand what we were trying to say? She knew
Mm.
a little bit of English, but she didn't know enough to fully understand. So my next question to my staff was, have we ever used an interpreter? To the police, have you ever used an interpreter? And they hadn't. And when we established what her first language was and got an interpreter on the phone to explain, she was more than happy to have us come and visit.
Mm.
And it's interesting that that was the barrier that she just didn't understand. So myself and one of the principal officers went out to the home with an interpreter and visited her. And it was interesting how everything unfolded, the concerns that she had for her child that we never knew. And she was able to give us intelligence on vehicle car registrations, description of older males, the fact that he was wearing 3 lots of tracksuits and that she'd found a knife in his room, the fact that she'd found drugs, all this information that we didn't know aside from that he was missing, and that was potentially an indicator that he was being exploited. She could tell us where she'd visited him, the roads that she'd found him in, and that she'd gone to look for him and asked him to come home and he would refuse. So this child was sleeping on the streets. He's 12 years old and she's
Mm.
walking the streets trying to find him. And all this information we perhaps would never have known had somebody, myself, just was a little bit curious about why is mom refusing? What is she scared of? What does she not know? The fact that her first language was not English was the barrier to her understanding. So
Mm.
once we go on, Alice,
Yeah,
yeah,
so I mean, I thought that we kind of had got to a place where interpreters were quite a common resource, kind of pulled in quite quickly. But is that not the case then? Do you think it's done on like a case by case basis? I mean, are the police not using interpreters as frequently as maybe we think?
I think it's done on a case by case basis. And my hypothesis is because mom knew some English,
Mm,
they
it was
felt that an
just about
interpreter
enough.
wasn't needed. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was very interesting that yes, she did know some English, but when you've got somebody talking to you in your own language, in your own dialect, you understand even more what's being asked of you. Um, it turns out that this child actually owed drug money, so he was drug debted. And all the statutory processes kick in. Then you need a strategy discussion because potentially there's a threat to life, there's a threat
Mm,
to harm, and what have you. And we just couldn't work out from him because he was missing so often. There was nobody that was there to be able to build a trusted relationship with him because of the frequent missing episodes.
mm,
One of my coordinators from an African background was able to find him, locate him, engage him, and talk to him and connect with him on that level. And I think that was because there were similarities in terms of culture that
yeah.
he felt that he could trust her and talk to her. And we managed to establish the extent of the harm, the potential harm that was, threatening towards him. And the way that we had to safeguard him was to take him out of the country. And that took
Wow.
big planning. We managed to get 2 aeroplane tickets for him and mom to go back to Africa. We had to talk to the authorities in Africa to make sure that that also was safe for him to go back there. So there was a lot of liaising cross country as well. But
Did he go
he
back to
he
where he
went
was
back to where
from?
he
Yeah.
originally came from.
Mhm.
And I mean, even the planning to just to not make sure he would go missing, to get him into the hotel up in London just before the flight. And he had gone missing, and we had the police searching for him. They retrieved him. We got him to London because we had like a rescue and response team that could take him to London. And we paid for the hotel, paid for mom, and we made sure that they boarded that plane. And a few months after, I remember mom writing to us and just saying to us that we wouldn't believe the change in her son. She sent us some photographs. He was back in
Oh,
school.
that's
He was
lovely.
happier. He'd put weight on because he'd lost significant weight from being out on the streets, not eating properly, not sleeping properly. And she just said, thank you, I've got my son back. And so for us, although the measures were so extreme, it just shows you how we have to work differently in social work, in particular around contextual harm to safeguard our children.
Yeah, there's definitely not kind of a one size fits all, is there? And actually, I imagine that that was such a unique input that you had that you couldn't do that with all of these
No,
children anyway. I mean, there wouldn't be the funding to make
no,
that possible.
yeah,
And also, I guess in some situations, some families would have maybe left left their country because of other safety
reasons.
issues and safeguarding issues, so that a return wouldn't
Be
necessarily,
safe.
yeah, be the best option. But um yeah, I mean, it's some similarities, I guess, across the stories that we've had previously. And I think at the root of most of these success stories is first acknowledging that sense of fear, acknowledging fear in a parent, which obviously she had considerably, especially if she couldn't really understand what was being said and what she thought might happen to her and to her son. So that sense of fear, but also it just always comes down to relationships.
Yes,
You obviously crossed that barrier in a way with her and thought in a way that other people hadn't about how to connect with her. Someone else was connecting with him, and that connection is how it, obviously a huge contributor to the successes to come out of it. Are there other factors that you can think that contributed to
I
success for
I
him?
think being in a service like my service where we can think a little bit more innovatively and creatively is
Mm,
something that's different. We're not hell-bound by statutory processes, policies, procedures. We just think about, we know that that's there and
mm,
there's certain things that we have to follow, but we can go outside of that box and be
mm,
a little bit more creative than you can do with traditional social work.
mhm,
Um, Having staff like that I have that work so well with children and will go back and back time and time and time again and be consistently in there is different to what a social work practitioner can do. You know, they are limited with their times. They have complex caseloads. They've got probably babies, um, middle-aged children, primary-age children, they're dealing with domestic abuse and neglect. Having a service that is specifically about
mm.
risk outside the family home and that can work innovatively, creatively, think outside of the box allows us, I think, to work a little bit differently. And the connection and building the trusted relationships can only happen if you are consistent in your approach, going back time and time and time again, even when the child's telling you to get lost, even when they're not there. You know, my workers will say to a child, every Wednesday between this time, I'm going to come and see you. Whether you're there or not, I'm still going to keep coming. And I know that social workers in the traditional world of social work just don't have the capacity. I think it's what they would want to do,
Oh,
and it's
absolutely.
their utmost willingness to want to do that, but the complexities of the caseloads that they carry and the volume that they carry doesn't allow for them all the time to be able to build those consistent, trusting relationships. And it's a shame because that's what we need. It's all about the relationships and the connections.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, I completely agree. Having the space in those locality teams to actually be able to think, reflect,
Mm,
consider how to build that relationship, see each parent and family as completely unique, and
that's
having
right.
the time and the space to plan for that. It just doesn't happen. It's
Yeah,
just like it's a constant hamster wheel. It's a
it is.
constant like fighting fire, and just over, which just ultimately leads to, I think, overwhelm, burnout, and yeah, that this I mean that's probably a whole other episode we could get
Yeah, it
into about the
is.
changes that are
And I
needed.
don't
But
forget what it's like to be a social worker. You know, on the front line, I've worked in child protection, I've worked in safeguarding, I've worked at the front door, I've worked in MASH. And I don't forget that constant, like you said, hamster on a treadmill. It it's hard to develop. And then again, we come in from a different angle. We're coming in from a supportive, wanting protect you and your child, like a whole systems approach. You know, if that shut down the road selling your child illegal vapes, we're going to look evidence to shut that shut down. Do you know what I mean? So we're coming from a different perspective, whereas the negative narrative, I think, that's in the media about social workers is that they come to take your children away. And again, that may have been another barrier for our mum thinking, well, I've got the police knocking on the door. I'm not supposed to, I'm not here illegally, but could they throw me out the country? You know, now I've got social workers coming in talking about an assessment. I don't even know what an assessment is, but then I've got this third person coming in who actually is saying to me, Mom, how can I help you? Like, we're worried about your son. You know, I can see that you're doing a really good job here. I know that you might be worried. Whereas everybody else has got their agenda. The police have an agenda to ensure that, you know, if he's committed a crime, that despite the fact that he's a victim, they still have to look at their statistics. A social worker's going in, she's got a family assessment to complete within 45 days. She needs to do this, this, and this. But we're coming in and we're saying, we don't really care about none of that. We just want to know what's going on and how we can help you. And we're here to listen and understand. And that's not to say the police and the social workers don't want to do that, but they are driven by a different agenda and targets and
Time scale. Yeah.
timescales and what have you. Whereas we don't really have that.
No. I bet people listening to this will be like, I want to be part of that too. Actually.
It's hard work. You know,
Uh,
we see a lot of devastation. You know, we've lost a lot of children. If I think I came into post 2019, the amount of children that have died, that have been murdered, that we've had to kind of experience that loss. The last two in November, two friends that died. It's been tragic, and we have to have a lot of clinical supervision and support. There's a lot of trauma associated with that, because when we lose a child, a mother's lost a child, a father's lost, the community's lost, and it's that whole system's trauma that we're dealing with. And it's a very challenging job, but when we look for glimmers of hope. And when things like this go right, and we get that feedback from mum that says, I feel like I've got my child back, he's back in school, he's healthy, those are the glimmers of hope that we hang on to.
And I mean, I was also thinking when you talk through his story, like he's probably going to have a lot of like PTSD type stuff going on. And I guess I would hope that maybe there might be some place that he can access, I don't know, some sort of therapeutic support there. I don't know how easily that would happen, but it's likely that, you know, all of those experiences are going to probably stay with him for quite a while, in terms of that, the fear that sounds like extremely real in
Yeah,
terms
it
of a threat
was.
to him.
And I think sometimes we think about therapeutic support as needing professional support. Sometimes it can be just the feeling that you feel safe, the feeling
Yes.
that you can sleep in your bed and
Mhm.
no one's calling you on a phone and telling you to hold this weapon. And, you know, sometimes it can just be that the place that you're in, you can sleep, you can eat, you can think freely, that threat is not there. And that in itself is therapeutic. But yeah, post-traumatic stress disorder is real. You know, we talk to children who have witnessed their best friend being murdered next to them. Now they start to walk with weapons in case, so that they can defend themselves in case something happens to them. And the threat for them and the heightened fear within walking within their communities is real. And I don't think we've got enough support in terms of mental health services and therapeutic and counselling support for our children. And when it is there, the waiting lists are so long, they can't access it as and when's needed. So one of the things that we want to train some of our workers to do is at least have some counselling skills to be able that when they're in that connection and having that relationship building with young people, that they can utilize
Yeah.
those counselling skills. Most of our staff have been trained on bleed kit training. If there's a stabbing or a shooting, they can respond. They know how to pack a wound and save a life. And you know, it's strange that in these days that you have to be thinking about training your staff in those ways. Social workers aren't trained like that. We're trained about theories, models, practice, research, how to complete an assessment. No one teaches you how to save a life. It's society has changed, and the threat to the children is so high now that we are losing our children through violence, serious violence, and nobody really trains you for that. So our whole training package has to be different. Our safety plans look differently to your traditional social work safety plans, because a child walking from here to catch a bus to go to school to another postcode area
Mm.
has to navigate risk every point of that way. So we have to support them to help them to navigate that risk, and then that becomes the safety plan. And they already know what their plan is because they're navigating that risk every single day. It's for us to tap into it and enhance that plan. Whereas that plan's going to look different to a child who's in a household where domestic abuse is. So our mindset has to change when we're working within this context.
Yeah, and just picking up about what you said about the some of your workers kind of being trained in counselling skills. And yeah, I completely agree that you don't necessarily need always to have this kind of intense psychotherapy, that a
Yeah.
lot of those therapies are really just talking therapies, talking through things that have happened, because you have to narrate that memory. Basically, that traumatic memory needs a narrative around it in order to offer that kind of containment, in order to sort of slot it in the right place in the mind. So there's lots of people that have had very traumatic things happen to them, and they may never have gone into kind of this medical world of therapy, but they have, through their close relationships, been able to talk through some of those experiences. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
completely, that's great. I think that sounds brilliant. Um, okay, so uh thinking about, I think our awareness now of what is going on in terms of basically everything you've covered, in thinking about the situation with children of a very young age becoming involved in drugs, becoming involved in drug running, becoming involved in weapons and using weapons and holding weapons for defense, and gangs, and also the radicalization, the child sexual exploitation. It's all kind of on our radar now more, isn't it? But my question to you would be, thinking about now the fact that we have got this new Labour government, what changes would you be saying are kind of the key things that we need to start doing now to not just have an awareness of this stuff, but really trying to work in more of a preventative way? I mean, it's so complex. Each of those sectors that I've just mentioned are so complex and nothing. It's not like one magic solution to fixing it all. But I guess from your experience, what would you say are some ways of trying to get to a place of preventing this from happening so frequently?
I think early identification and prevention is key. I think we are quick to respond when incidents occur, but we don't look at the indicators of when we could probably get in a little bit more earlier. So for me, there's something about funding, and we've got very short funding streams. We've got funding streams that are given out to community interest companies who are grassroots within the community that can do some of this early prevention work. It doesn't have to be at a statutory level. We've got really good people that live in the community, that have their own little organizations, that know the legacy and the generation of the families, that know the early intervention and can go in and do it. But they're given such short periods of funding, a year to year. They have to keep applying. There's a lot of red tape and bureaucracy.
Mm.
Funding needs to be for longer. You are not going to see change within a year. You need funding streams that are for 5 years and 10 years, proper funding streams. And we need to, as a government, not just look at statutory services as the professionals, the actual people who are living the experiences within the community. We should be listening to them. They know the issues, they're experiencing it, they're living it day in, day out. They will also know some of the solutions. So how are we tapping into them to support them to become part of this solution that should be a whole systems solution? So there's a role for statutory, there's a role for charity, a role for voluntary, there's a role for community, and we should be bringing them in line as part of the professional group to also aid in the prevention of this. We have got a lot of deep-rooted issues within the community: deprivation, cost of living. All these things are drivers. We're in a society where we're very materialistic. Children go to school, they see other children in Nike, Jordans, Air Force Ones. They want the same. So
Mm.
how as we as a a local, national, regional, looking at entrepreneurship? How are we looking at growing our children to have a legacy and a generation? If you can sell drugs, if you can supply on demand and sell drugs and put people out and put children out to work, you are actually running your own business. You're a salesperson.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, I've thought this a lot actually. Like on all kinds of levels, organizational levels, strategy
exactly.
level,
You've
planning
got it.
levels.
You've got
Yeah.
it. You're even sending them to different parts of the country to work, and
Mm.
you're taking them, you're trafficking them, but you are transporting your staff. If we think of it as a business, that tells me our children are very, very intelligent children. Okay, so let's flip that then and make that into something positive. Let's flip that into a business that they can mold themselves. That's a legitimate business. But I don't see how our government is looking at those things, and we need to step away from just offending behavior and
Mm.
sending to prison. We have to think differently. Exclusions is a big vulnerability. We have over 300 and maybe 85 schools in Birmingham. It's a lot of schools where a lot of schools can make their own decisions about permanently excluding children. Well, when you do that, you throw them out there to the perpetrators that are just waiting because they're helping to disrupt all this stuff so that you
Mm.
can throw them out and they're waiting
Mm.
for them to put them on the streets. There's something that done about exclusions, about schools not just being able to make those decisions within isolation. The Children Act needs a complete review. 1989, 2004. We're now in 2024. How
Mm.
have we not reviewed that legislative framework to make it more meaningful to what's happening today? The education needs a whole reform system. We're still educating our children from a traditional archaic way of education. Why can't we have children taking their exams, their English exam, by doing a film? The amount of videos, YouTube videos that I see our children who are involved in gangs doing, they're so professionally made. Sometimes I'm not
Mm.
even listening to the lyrics. I'm just looking at how professionally made. These are filmmakers. So how are we not utilizing their creativity to pass an English exam or to pass a maths exam? Do you know what I mean? We really need to think about how we change that whole landscape of education, the Children Act, the way that we put opportunities out there for our children, entrepreneurships, and invest more in the community to get in earlier rather than having a whole, um, need for children's services and statutory services like the police and health. Those services are getting cut left, right, and centre. So why aren't we utilising what's already in the community? That's what I would say to our government. I see serious youth violence is on their agenda. I'm pleased about that. I just want to know, what is that going to look like? Are we looking at preventative? And if so, how? How are you communicating and getting advice and guidance from the people that are really experiencing it?
Yeah, it's not enough writing it on a piece of paper
It's not.
as an agenda. And I fully back you, Claire. Get to number 10 now. And if
I'm
anyone's listening
trying
with
to get there.
government connections, she's here. She knows what needs to be fixed. Just give her a space and she'll run with it. But yeah, I completely agree with all of that. I think it's yeah, I just hope that I think now, especially with the section that you are working within, people can see that the impact that is having now, the wider impact that's having on society. And it shouldn't be that that means that people step up because now it's affecting everyone. But unfortunately, I think that is how the government works.
Yeah,
But clearly this is not just the families that are involved. It's a much wider community issue now.
absolutely.
So that should also be another reason to completely take note and start thinking in some of these ways that you have suggested. Okay, so my very last question I always end with is, what do you love most about your job?
Um, I think mainly, I think connecting with the community. It's taken me probably 3, 4 years to do it. And we're still not connected with the whole community because there are communities within communities. But I think going out and engaging with the community, building the trusted relationships, leads us to gather more intelligence, leads us to be able to disrupt and arrest and incarcerate those perpetrators that are abusing our children. And it's hard work. You know, you have to be visible in the community. I can say I probably work 7 days a week, every hour of the day. I can be on holiday. A parent will call me. A business person will call me to say, Claire, this is happening. We know this, we know that. It's a lot to deal with, but we wouldn't have got most of the outcomes that we've got, successful outcomes that we've got without the community. The statutory services, we've been able to build meaningful, trusting relationships with the police, our gangs police, our exploitation nurses, education. We've got brilliant relationships. Hardest nut to crack was community parents and carers, because they see us as an organisation that is statutory and they don't trust us. But the work that we've been able to do to work with the parents and carers to now get to a point where our parents and carers was quite an organic group where they were actually delivering therapy to each other. They just didn't know it. And now growing into their own community interest company where they will have legacy and go on to advocate on behalf of other parents and support other parents. And for me, that is one of the best success stories, that you could start with a disaffected community that has no trust, build trust, give them the tools, empower them, train them, get them on advocacy training and awareness so that they're now, you know, the legacy continues, because now they can do that for other parents and advocate on their behalf. For the children, I love how I've got 20 children that have been either affected directly by exploitation or have gone missing or serious youth violence. And we've been able to take those 20 children, take them on residentials, educate them to OCN accredited level to become youth inspectors. It tells me that if we put the time and the effort in, anything is possible. And those are the glimmers of hope that I hang on to when I have rough days and significant incidents happen. I think to myself, okay, yeah, that's happened. I can do something to stop it maybe happening again. I don't think we'll ever prevent death and violence. I think we can work to try and reduce it. But then I look at some children that have been through certain things, where they are now. One of our young people performed at the Commonwealth Games. You know, this is a child that was walking with weapons, that was getting involved in gangs, that was selling drugs, and we caught him, we contained him, we got him in the studio. He said this is what he enjoyed. His parents were on the verge of throwing him out on the street. We spoke to them, we educated them about exploitation and gangs. His dad was actually a pastor, brought him back into the fold. He's safe, he's at home. And then we presented him with a number of opportunities. He performed at our awards ceremony, Commonwealth Games. Imagine that. And, you know, he's making videos, and the language that he uses in his music now is a language of empowerment and change rather than violence. So, you know, when we see things like that, those are the things that I most enjoy about my job, and connecting with people like you. You know, I'm on LinkedIn a lot, and I find that I've connected with so many people that are doing so much wonderful things, and that connection leads to more opportunities for our children. So I like getting out and meeting people and connecting with people who have the same or similar mindsets, because it presents more opportunities for all of our children.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire. I think that's
Thank
going
you,
to be
Alice.
great for people to listen to and hear a bit more about those teams and what you're doing. And with social work in general, it's all complex, isn't it?
It
All of it
is.
is complex. We're dealing with complex situations, complex behaviors. Just, yeah, there's so much going on there, but I know that everyone just tries to do the best they can with the
100%.
section that they are working with. And just like you know, I hold on to these successes, and I also see through LinkedIn and other channels brilliant work people are doing to
Yeah,
empower other people as well. So that's all we can kind of hope for,
yeah,
whilst also maintaining our sense of, well, this is what we know needs to happen to positively impact. These are the changes we want to see. we'll keep saying that this is what we want to happen, and hope that people are listening, the right people are listening. And that's all we can do, I guess.
Well, we have to keep saying it, don't we? Because there's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if we keep talking about it, maybe eventually it will happen.
Exactly. Yes, I believe. But in the meantime, I'm totally backing you to get to number 10 and give them a dose of reality. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you, Alice, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is really in its infancy phase, so please do like, share, subscribe, tell your colleagues, tell your managers, tell anyone else that you think might benefit. Thank you.